Hello and welcome to this edition of the Housing Ombudsman Service podcast. I am Victoria King, one of the sector learning and development leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And today I'm joined by Daniel Churton, who has worked in the housing sector for many years and has a wealth of experience from lots of different aspects. But I'll let Daniel tell you more about that. So welcome to the podcast, Dan. Please can you tell us a bit about your background and your experience?
Hi, Victoria. Well, thank you for inviting me on. It's a great pleasure. In terms of background, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Went to university and studied that, and then have kind of weaved my way through a range of different sectors. So starting in chemicals engineering, via PFI property outsourcing, and then 10 years in water utilities. A bit of a random spell looking after procurement, supply chain, and an out-of-home advertising business, and then settled into Orbit, where I was the commercial and transformation director for a period of 3 years, looking after procurement and supply chain, and helping them build a function to be ready for the Procurement Act, and then 18 months with Fortum as their client solutions director. And then in recent, in the last sort of 6 months, I've been working as an interim in the sector, supporting either suppliers in the sector or other housing associations. But what I suppose what's interesting is it might look quite random, but they're all businesses that own, operate, and maintain and invest in assets, which means I've got a bit of an external perspective on what external and best practice could look like across different sectors. And I've sat on both sides of the outsourced relationship, so both client and delivery partner, and it's been in ops and customer and supply chain and transformation and data and analytics. So lots of different perspectives. It's really been quite a good journey over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed getting into what the sector does, and in particular, I suppose the last areas have been around understanding what regulatory performance is and understanding how RPs perform against regulatory metrics and how they can improve performance and how a contractor can influence that. So that's probably been the last frame of reference in the last sort of couple of years.
Thanks, Dan. So we're going to be talking all things repairs and maintenance today. You've got out of housing sector experience, all that regulatory experience, the experience of working for a large landlord, Orbit, and also Fortum, who work exclusively in the social housing doing repairs and maintenance on social homes. It's great to have you here to talk about the sector so that we can share with others the things you've noticed and go into sort of what still needs to be done. We, outside of this podcast, have talked previously around your belief of every home matters and putting the well-being of residents at the heart of what you do. In our most recent Spotlight report, which was Repairing Trust, released back in May 2025, we talk about landlords engaging with residents in selecting repairs and maintenance contractors. Is this something you've seen happen? And if you have, how did that work?
Oh, good question. Firstly, I definitely do believe in every home matters, but I can't claim that mantra as my own. It's the core of the Fortum strategy, but it's an absolutely brilliant strapline. I suppose there's two perspectives for me on this, having run procurement in a housing association and also working for a contractor. For a landlord, engaging with residents during selection is an absolute no-brainer, as it starts the hopefully long-term three-way relationship between landlord, contractor and resident from a really good place. And if you don't do that, you end up with just a relationship between landlord and contractor only, and then all the work is ahead of you to build that positive relationship with residents. It is their home, and this third party has been independently selected to be in the home and do repairs, and it's kind of thrust upon them. And people will be going in and out of the homes, and they've not had any say on who they are, what they're like, what behaviours they should adopt, and all that sort of stuff. So from a contractor's perspective, this doesn't set them up for success from a positive resident perspective. Involving residents gives them a real starting sense of ownership and trust, and I think that's the foundation that we have to start from. And you're much more likely to be satisfied with a contractor service and work if if you've engaged with them and you can support them to continually improve. So yes, this is something that I've seen happen, but it's not as often as you would hope. Experience doesn't seem to be that this is happening, but it feels like it is starting a little bit more often. So examples of how that has worked then. Landlords regularly survey residents on requirements for a service that's been tendered, and then summarise them and then present them to bidders so that they're aware as they enter the process. This always highlights the criticality of a repair service and the well-justified expectation of a decent, responsive and flexible service. Communication and regular updates and the friendliness of operatives and work quality also tend to emerge in that process. It's no surprise, but it always comes out. Existing resident groups are sometimes involved in marking tenders. I've seen that in a number of occasions. I've also seen a presentation to both client and resident reps as part of a scored interview. And one client actually involved residents in a competitive dialogue process. So there are some HAs that have really been innovative in this particular space. I've also seen resident involvement continue beyond the tender. So you see resident seats on core groups occasionally, which is really getting some direct feedback and input, and also personal experience. I was involved in a pricing renegotiation when I was at Orbit, and landlord, resident, non-execs are involved in that review and governance. So, practically there are ways in which that can happen, and it's very positive if it does.
Thanks, Dan. You've got experience, as you mentioned, working as a director at Orbit and also as client solutions director at Fortem. Housing Ombudsman Service, obviously we deal with complaints. So to bring it back to complaints, what are your observations about social housing repairs maintenance complaints?
So given I've sat on both landlord and contractor side of R&M services, I'll kind of look at it from a perspective of an outsourced service rather than a DLO, just because I can add a bit more flavour to that. I'm sure we'll talk about partnerships and collaboration between landlords and contractors later on, but from experience, that's really critical. And landlord and contractor need to really understand each other's perspective to get a strong partnership and focus on delivering effective services to residents. And this also applies on how you manage and respond to complaints. It's absolutely key. I know that the Ombudsman has regularly observed disjoints between communication and information between contractor and landlord, and it generally drops things in a black hole, and that's what you need to avoid. Most contractors will generally focus on contractual KPIs, which obviously can vary from landlord to landlord, and that's because they financially gain or suffer from them. And in theory, if the KPIs are right, it should keep the client happy and retain the contract in the long term. But I think what it does is misses the wider pressures that landlords face in the sector at the moment. There's obviously a huge current economic climate and financial challenges that they're facing, pressure on repairs. And I think it's worth just referencing that I think very recently the sector global accounts have just come out. And I think last year, collectively, the sector spent something like 10 billion on R&M, but it was only 8.8 million the year before. So that just shows you the step change in the financial pressures. They're obviously increasing standards. The consumer standards is obviously the new competence and conduct standard that's coming out in October later in the year. There's definitely increasing expectations from residents, particularly post-COVID. That's had a big dramatic effect on expectations, increasing volumes of complaints and additional pressures from things like cladding remediation and decarbonisation and so on. So I guess the approach needs to be, especially for contractors, to see the bigger picture and work with the landlord to drive how repair services are delivered to residents and to try and help be a solution to some of those challenges which they wouldn't normally try and be. So just to kind of narrate that a bit, generally 50 to 60% of complaints relate to repairs or property condition. That's well documented. Landlord and contractors working together to meet the complaints handling code is key. Generally, it's you flip it over the fence to a contractor, they do their bit and flip it back. It should really be seen as an end-to-end process, and that's where our first conversation actually emerged, was discussing how contractors can work under that complaints handling code. Combined focus on responding quickly and within timescales, so the clock starts and stops from the point at which a complaint's made, it's irrelevant. It goes to a contractor and back again. So it should be focused on that end-to-end timeline and ensuring an accurate and detailed and timely response to support the complaint. And a lot of that information will sit in two places in terms of the contractor's knowledge and the landlord's knowledge. A contractor understanding the consumer standards and the TSM scores and making sure that they work with a landlord to pull the levers in the right way to influence the scores to go up. And as a good example of that, I think some research from Housemarque last year saw or established about a 10 to 12% difference between local operational repairs service scores and tenant satisfaction measures. OPEX costs and the squeeze on operating margins is a major pressure, and it's significantly driven by repairs. And sector benchmark data shows that this pressure has increased over years, as I just described with the global accounts. And as a final point, landlords tend to look at repairs in isolation and deal with increasing repairs costs by pressuring contractors to absorb costs. I see that regularly from both sides of the fence. However, this doesn't deal with the primary cause, which is mainly down to underinvestment or target investment in stock and declining condition. And contractors who are the face or the ears on the ground or the data monitors for landlords should actively work with landlords to help them target investment into poor performing stock to reduce repairs. And that basically starts to turn the tap off and prevent repairs and subsequent complaints coming down the pipe.
So repair works on a residence home can be really disruptive, whether that's like a big job like a kitchen replacement or even something small. Having random people in your house can be very, very disruptive. What can landlords and contractors do to minimise that disruption for residents?
Oh, blimey, there's a lot of things, but I think it's key to remember that this is a home, which is a residence home, and something has gone wrong with it, and the repair service, be it DLO or with a contractor, could just see the inconvenience of something needing a repair, and they've just got to get in and fix it. But this does really miss what disruption could mean for a resident, to be honest. So if you start with the obvious practical disruption that you get, you've got something that's not working. It could be significant, like a boiler or a cooker. The potential mess and loss of access to a space, so if a kitchen or a bathroom or something is out of order for a period of time, or even, on a smaller scale, a missed appointment or someone just not turning up or turning up unannounced. So that's a practical disruption. And the things you could do is just make it easy to report a repair or reschedule an appointment, offer a range of ways that a resident could communicate with the repairs service provider. So it could be text, it could be to a portal, it could be whatever, not just over the phone. Flexible appointments around school times are starting to become a bit more common. And I think that's really, really important now. Post-COVID, we're starting to see a migration of people back into going into offices again. Hybrid working is starting to reduce slightly, definitely. If things are rescheduled, give as much notice as possible and confirm a new appointment as soon as possible. There's a lot of Uber-style apps, tracking apps that allow residents to see when somebody's coming and be ready for them. And operatives can use multilingual flashcards. So there's a relatively high proportion of non-English speakers in a lot of social homes. So that's a really key part of being prepared to communicate. When in a home, make sure you segregate the work area from living space to try and constrain any dust or dirt or noise and that sort of stuff. And following a repair, we make sure that the area is left clean and tidy afterwards. It should look like that we've not been there, really. And critically use data and insight to understand how to reduce the rate of repairs and continually improve the service. It's the bit that people forget. We all make the service really good, but actually the service shouldn't need to be occurring in the first place if we're able to be proactive in terms of maintenance. So it's important to recognise that the home is a resident safe space, a comment that you've made earlier, and they've got no say in who's coming in. So it can be very emotionally disruptive for them having a repair done, particularly if it's a significant one. It will feel very intrusive and potentially an invasion of privacy, and people can feel judged, especially if they've been struggling to keep their homes clean or tidy. And there's always a risk of personal belongings being damaged too, which people are concerned about. So talked about things that can be done to make sure that appointments are set and kept with tracking apps and stuff like that. And there's also things like tone of voice are very important with written material and how residents are engaged with day to day with the resident. That's really key. There could also be a really serious disruption due to risk to health to residents. And if a repair is delayed or not finished properly, it can actually make living conditions worse for the period of time until the repair is complete. This is obviously something that a contractor or a DLO service provider would need to take extremely seriously, and it just means that the service needs to be resourced to the right level to respond to the timescales needed. And this is really key, obviously, with Arab's law now coming into effect last October. Operatives should also be able to recognise and deal with hazards and have the right levels and blends of skills to do this across all the homes. So this ability to proactively identify hazards and get them resolved, I think, is a really significant thing. And then, just as a final point, we know that 60% of social homes now have households where someone has a long-term illness or a disability, and this includes challenges with mental health. So this makes what could seem like a minor repair be really significant for a particular resident. So we know where residents and neurodiverse work would need to be planned to minimise impact and stress, and we would need to liaise as early as we can with carers. And where residents have got mental health needs, tailor risk assessments to suit that. So all of this requires knowledge about residents from the landlord, but it's something really, really important. And to be honest, my son's autistic, so knowing the impact of change on him, this is a really significant thing for me. Is particularly the neurodiverse perspective, and operatives being able to deal with that at point of delivery.
Yes, having that communication and that sharing of information, so the landlord finding that out from the resident, finding out what's best for them, and then sharing that ahead of time with the contractors. You said DLO there, direct labour?
Sorry, direct labour organisation. Yeah, it's an in-source service. Sorry, I'm acronym hell in the sector, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. You've got an outsourced service or a direct labour delivery. Sorry.
So communication is obviously really important. We talked just there about it being a home being an emotional place, that safe space, and repairs being really emotionally disruptive. Communication can really help with that. And whatever the sector, poor communication can drive complaints. And actually, we've published a report in spring 2025 here at the Housing Ombudsman Service, which talks about how communication needs to be timely, transparent, tailored, and also come across in the right tone. Why is communicating with residents so important when it comes to repairs?
Well, we touched on some of this in the earlier question, and it kind of comes down to progressively building trust with residents in us as their repair service provider. So from a perspective of a contractor, you could be entering a new repairs contract. Residents don't know the organisation. They'll probably have a legacy of past experiences and how they feel that they've been communicated with and treated in the past by landlord and contractor. In this case, it's fair to assume that a contractor will have to start from a position of low trust, and they'll have to build that. They'll have to work very hard to fix that, as we've already chatted about. So residents need to learn what to expect from them. They need to understand how to access the service and see how they're performing. There'll be different apps, different portals or whatever in the change of service. And if you're going from an in-source to an outsourced service, obviously that can be an even more significant change in terms of access. And residents need to feel that they've been heard and understood and respected. And creating that feeling is clearly going to take quite a lot of time. Doing those things should start to settle the service down, and what you would normally expect to see is that noise from both the residents and landlord as a client to a contractor like Fortum or Waits or whoever would be should then start to reduce, and failure demand should drop. And for listeners that don't know what failure demand is, it's essentially the number of times something that wasn't done right first time. Basically, it was how often is the failure rate, basically. This obviously benefits the resident with less frustration with the service. They'll have to chase less, there'll be less of an impact on them. And the contractor would benefit because they get progressively more efficient, and their service performance should improve. And the landlord should benefit from that because there'll be efficiencies, and we'll see their regulatory performance going up as with the links with the TSMs or whatever. And we tend to see early signs of that improvement through things like sentiment analysis, the number of compliments we get, and operational, customer satisfaction scores. And for those that don't know what sentiment analysis is, you see in a lot of customer contact centres AI-driven assessments of the words that we used, and it kind of aggregates together into a kind of a sentiment score that sort of defines how happy or unhappy a given caller might have been. It's almost like a really early indicator, just for customer satisfaction that's coming down the line. And we then tend to see upticks in operational performance. So once you start to see customers being more satisfied, you'll tend to then see operational performance metrics start to go up. So you'll see access rates going up, first time fix rates are going up, overall SLA performance might well go up. And all of those things should then start to see complaint rates coming down and complaints performance improving because the volumes have dropped. So last year I developed the design of a couple of resident or customer in Fortum's world called customers, how customer oriented performance dashboards that could help a contractor or a DLO, actually a direct labour organisation, sorry, acronym again, to track performance. So one looked at service impact on residents, so how much was a service or failure rate impacting on a resident, and the second was the stage of the customer journey. So customer journey mapping is becoming a bit of a thing in the sector. How well is that journey being delivered end to end? So it goes from being an operational lens, and it starts to look at it from the perspective of those experiencing the service. And finally, the landlord should start to see year-on-year improvements coming through on TSMs. And now we've had 2 years worth of scores, you can actually start to see that happening. I think there's been a collective step up across the sector on average, which is positive. It means that that performance metric, those metrics are starting to have the desired effect on performance.
I think quite a few landlords have told us they're mapping the customer journey and like looking at how digging down into each stage of it and seeing what they can do better in those sectors, and how they can communicate better in that journey as well. So back to our Spotlight on Repair and Trust. We say in that report, we recommend in that report actually, that landlords should know their residents as well as their homes, and then use this information to manage service delivery and to consider the information needed to support the core objectives of a high quality modern repairs and maintenance service. And this may include allowing residents to track and reschedule appointments. You talked earlier about the Uber style tracking system, like I get it on my deliveries and DHL, you can see where the delivery driver is. What systems and processes have you seen work well between landlords and contractors to share information about residents and stock so that high quality service is provided?
Oh, that's a corker. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just briefly talk about information that's available in the sector that actually sits outside landlords and contractors and on a given contract. So I've done in recent years a bit of work with the English Housing Survey, which is a real well of information actually, and it allows you to look at all tenure types and focus in on social housing, which is what I did, and it really helps to profile what a typical resident, the properties and the communities that they live in look like. And for a contractor, for example, less so for an individual landlord, but for a contractor, it allows you to better understand the residents in the sector that you're serving and develop an overall proposition in the marketplace. So as a starting point, there's some cracking information out there that people just need to embrace and use. Obviously, landlords own the primary data of residents and their homes in their particular remit, and they should share that information on residents and their potential vulnerabilities, for example, with a contractor, so that the contractor can make sure that they engage appropriately with residents as the services are being delivered. So, for example, a contractor should know a resident's preference in how they would receive communication. So it could be letter, email, SMS. It could be anything. It could be, particularly for urgent things, it could be, SMS or email to get through an immediate message through. Contractors should also record key information on customer needs, obviously in line with GDPR, on their core works management system. So at every customer touch point, and share information at relevant information back with the landlord. So we talked about customer journey. The contractor system will obviously have a fundamental part in that customer journey too. operatives and field-based staff can use simple and secure apps that allow them to quickly and confidentially log and share safeguarding concerns with the landlord if they enter a property. Fortum had a particularly good app that did that. Capturing key information on welfare or property condition, estate level issues during visits. I mean, particularly in Awab's law world, it could be proactive observation of hazards, for example. This allows effectively your contractor to be the eyes and ears on the ground for landlords and help them maintain the data quality. There's no difference if that's a direct labour organisation. Your operative should be doing exactly the same function if it's an in-house service. And I've seen some of these apps also generate things like seasonal reminders and safeguarding prompts for operatives for looking for signs for fuel poverty in the winter months, for example. I saw a recent project where it was actually a pilot project where a set of sensors were trialled for a period in homes where damp had been reported several times, or where residents had particular vulnerabilities. The sensors provide data guided, personalised recommendations on remediation to help try and address the root causes of damp. And it also allows landlords to develop their asset management plans. They were only in for a period of time, those sensors, but the data allowed some real deep thinking. So they don't need to be permanent. They could be applied for a period to gather some information to allow some proper in-depth thinking. And we have to start talking about AI at some point. And I've seen developments in workflow systems that will surface instant interaction history and highlight risks or patterns, things like repeat complaints, no access visits, and the history of repairs on a resident's property. This allows a repairs scheduling team to steer residents to optimal time slots based on past behaviour, or to highlight with a contractor where there might be a challenge in terms of gaining access to a particular property. And as a final comment, we need to talk about data quality and the issues that is bringing to the sector, and the report actually articulates this really well in the survey results that you talk about. It's a problem that needs to be addressed by the sector, and is just a massive inhibitor to being able to repair trust. Referencing AI again, it's regularly talked about as potentially bringing great opportunities for the sector, but it only works on a solid platform for quality and complete data. That's curated and is in real time and is available. It's not a black box that's going to fix it. So that data element is for me is one of the biggest levers to repairing trust, because we actually know what we're dealing with, what services are happening, and we know the residents very well, and we know the performance of the assets.
We know that no access is a real pain point for many contractors, for many landlords. Are there any approaches to no access that you've seen working well? And what should happen in an ideal world when a repair operative can't get access to a property to do a repair?
Well, experience says that each landlord has their own set of policies and processes that sort of define how to deal with no access. And from a contractor's perspective, this would normally sit in their contract. So at least across the landlord and across the residents of a given landlord, you would see consistency. But from experience, that approach can vary from landlord to landlord. I've seen some might require one attempt for access and others have got three. Now, best practice under Awab's law says it should be three, but historically I've seen sort of quite a lot of inconsistency in the number of attempts, or not even defined at all in some contracts. Obviously, the most important thing for repair service is to do everything they can leading up to appointment to try and avoid a no access scenario. It's not in anybody's interest, either a resident or a landlord or a contractor, that we can't get in and complete a repair. It's exactly the same with an internal service. However, there are some things that I see across the sector that are generally consistent of how you could try and increase the chances of gaining access. So operatives obviously must carry identification and clearly explain the purpose of a visit. Only visit on a pre-agreed appointment. There's nothing worse than turning up unannounced. I'm just passing. We've talked a little bit about what that might do to certain residents, particularly those with neurodiverse, or have got they're not prepared for that potential intrusion in their eyes. If no one answers, try to contact the resident either by phone or intercom. It could be that they're outside in the garden. It could be that the local, they've just popped out to the shops. Leave a missed visit card containing clear next steps and contact details so they can proactively contact to say, oh, I'm just around the corner, please come back. Accurately record the attempted access with things like date and time, method of contact, and other relevant information, maybe photographs as well. It's key to differentiate a refused access at this point too, which should be well evident. So there's a big difference between a refused access and a no access. Record evidence photos verified through geolocation. So I've, in Fortum, the photos worked with geolocation, and then the van tracking data would also be used to back this up, so you could prove that the operative was there with the van as well as there with the photograph. On a second attempt, contact the resident to understand why access was missed. Offer support any concerns that they have. So it could be, I was nervous, or I didn't know who was coming. Talk through how that would look for the next visit. And then on a third no access, this is where you would escalate to teams like housing officers or tenancy sustainment teams, and they might investigate safeguarding concerns or vulnerabilities. And usually a protocol would then be followed that may ultimately lead to legal action. That generally doesn't involve the contractor, but that's generally where it gets to. Awaab's law has a key emphasis on gaining access to resolve hazards. There's a huge proactivity requirement in Awaab's law now, with landlords needing detailed evidence of the whole chain of events for all of the attempts to gain access, and that helps them particularly protect themselves against potential litigation. In terms of additional approaches, some we've touched on already. So improving communication is obviously really key. Tone of voice is a key part of that too. Always giving advance notice and never turning up without an appointment. Flexible scheduling to account for specific needs. So there could be some people could only be available at certain times of the day if they're having treatment, or they may be looking after children at certain points. Operative training so they understand how to approach sensitive situations and communication. And a consistent issue I see is out-of-date contact details for residents. And also unknown vulnerabilities. So, we've talked about it again, but quality of information is key to increase the chances.
That's really interesting, because it echoes again what we found, that giving sufficient notice of appointments, trying to accommodate a resident's preferred timings, confirming appointments and reminding residents when those appointments are due to take place, that's all going to help reduce the number of missed appointments. So in a different Spotlight report, in the Spotlight on Knowledge and Information Management, we recommend that a wastage analysis is conducted on missed appointments. Is this something you've ever done in your experience? And if you have, what was the outcome of doing such an analysis?
Yeah, this is an area that really sort of falls on my data and insight nerd gift. So I quite enjoy doing this sort of stuff. So yeah, this kind of analysis is critical to anybody continually improving a service. So from a landlord's perspective, you would see reduced complaints, and with Awaab's law, ensuring response times are hit. For example, contractors maximising workforce utilisation. What that allows is improved performance for residents, because you've got greater capacity to deal with more work. Residents would see reduced impact from having to be home for missed appointments and then having to do it again in the future, and so on. One thing I was going to raise is in the report, there's an absolutely awful case study of a poor resident who I think ended up using 14 days of leave through missed appointments. It's just absolutely horrendous, really. So, there are some very extreme examples of this going very, very wrong. This type of analysis really is about triangulating all of the information available that relates to missed appointments, which could be information and insights derived from complaints. It could be profile analysis of patterns of missed appointments and the root causes. So hopefully organisations are doing root cause analysis of why appointments are being missed, content of calls made and received, and so on. This can be used to then identify, the root causes of why appointments are being missed, and fed into a rolling action plan to eliminate those causes. So, a bit of Pareto analysis, so that if you've got something that's causing 20 or 30% of your missed appointments, target that, and so on, and then move on to the next, and so on. And it could be things like poor resource allocation. It could be that demand timing in the day doesn't match resource availability in the day. It could be unrealistic appointment windows, bad planning and scheduling. It could be whatever. And when this has when this has an effect and an uptick on appointments being kept occurs, operationally you'll tend to see a positive effect on access rates. So if appointments are being kept, you'll start to see access rates increase, first time fix rates will then improve, service productivity would then start to improve for the service provider, be it internal or outsourced, which in turn gives greater resource capacity to service SLAs and service residents and so on and so on. So it tends to flow through. It's the bit that unlocks downstream performance. We also tend to see emergency rates come down. So as repair issues haven't been allowed to fester, you're not seeing residents phoning up a contact centre and escalating it and being given an emergency appointment to try and rectify and appease the resident. So generally things start to settle down and the service just becomes a little bit more consistent. A couple of quick additional points though. This kind of analysis shouldn't just be confined to missed appointments though, and can be applied to any of the key performance indicators of a good repair service. So a diagnostic rate at the front end, so how often are you diagnosing a repair accurately, access rates, first time fix rates, repairs completed in SLAs and so on. You could do all of the analysis in the same way on each of those individually. And a big one for me, secondly, the responsibility for an end-to-end repair service where it's outsourced sits between both the landlord and the contractor. So driving down missed appointments should be collaborative and between both parties. It's not just the contractor. The way the call's taken, the way the repair's diagnosed and the way that's articulated to the contractor also has a really significant effect on performance. So it can't just be seen as a contractor or a service, the service element, the operator element of a landlord if it's insourced.
You'll be pleased to know my next question is also about data.
Good.
We talk in the Spotlight Report on Repairing Trust about using insights gained from data analysis to drive those meaningful changes and to enhance repairs and maintenance services for residents. And actually, by doing this, it should help identify underlying factors that are stopping a high quality repair service. Is this something you've ever done? And if so, how did you do it? And then what did you do with that information that you gathered?
Well, I guess we started to answer this question in the previous one, where I talked about triangulating multiple data sets. In that particular case, it was on missed appointments to drive improvement. And I also talked about how we could use the same approach across all key repairs performance metrics, but the comments I made were focusing on sort of singular KPIs in isolation, really. But I also like to take a holistic perspective too, because everything is interrelated. So in the last few years, I've done a lot of work on developing end-to-end repairs dashboards, which measure key KPIs presented in one end-to-end dashboard that reflects in this case, a repair service, and that allows benchmarking of performance across multiple regions or property types if you're in a really big, like a sanctuary or a Peabody type RP. But from a contractor's perspective, it could be a repair service across different landlords. And critically, this shows how each KPI interacts with each service, so you can tune it. Firstly, you can see which services are good and bad, and you can drill down and understand why. But you can see on an individual service how one KPI upstream can have an effect on a KPI downstream, and you can start to tune it and refine it to try and get the best performance. A good example of this is things like a repairs diagnostic rate. So when a resident phones up and a customer agent has to diagnose the repair, that quality of diagnosis can have a major influence on, for example, the downstream first time fix rate. In theory, if your diagnostic rate is 70%, it will be very difficult to exceed a 70% first time fix rate, because otherwise the 30% has been misdiagnosed. So you can just see how you would fix that. If you fix diagnosis, you're likely to have an effect on your first time fix rate. In terms of the end-to-end service management, this is a really logical approach to take. And it works well for landlords that self-deliver because they own the entire value chain. So on a repair service that's insourced, point of call through to delivery is all in one place. Data is all in one organisation. But where it's outsourced, and this is obviously where my experience sat in the supply chain plays in, landlords tend to retain ownership of that front end. And what that means is creating an end-to-end dashboard would need to be very trusting. Data needs to come from multiple sources, and data needs to be aggregated together and combined. My experience is that this is a bit of a cultural challenge with some landlords. Each party tends not to want to see underneath each other's bonnet. So, a contractor might not want to show productivity rates, or, a landlord might not want to show a diagnostic rate. But ultimately, the only person that loses out in that is the resident. So for me, this is where the trust kicks in. You have to reflect that end-to-end service so that it can be managed and optimized across both parties. In terms of how would you practically do this, then I guess you would take the raw data feeds and they'd be automatically pipelined into a common data warehouse and aggregated together in Power BI. And this means that all repairs data is held in one scalable and resilient place. So at the end of the contract, if the service is outsourced, the full end-to-end service performance can be provided to the landlord. It helps if it's been insourced. It also helps when that's retendered with full visibility of how performance is actually being delivered. And my view is that the sector really needs to get over this mindset of landlord and contractor not being transparent with each other, to be honest. I think it's one of the biggest inhibitors to partnership working. These kind of dashboards should be used as a kind of in operational meetings to continually improve performance, but they should also be used for insight strategic core groups. So they're generally the meetings between landlords and contractors, so the partnership can discuss and try to improve the end-to-end service and not get into the usual arguments about whose data's right. My work bank looks different to yours, my SLA is different to yours. If you're arguing about performance, the one party that's missing out here is residents, and for me, we've just got to get over that. This is about a partnership trying to deliver a combined service to a resident. It's the only way that this can go for me.
We talked earlier about how disruptive repairs can be to residents. With large planned building works like retrofits, they can be incredibly disruptive. What have you seen done to try and minimise the disruption to residents when it comes to large planned building works? And how can contractors and landlords work together to minimise that disruption on those bigger projects?
Well, I mean, as you've alluded to, the scale and how long these kind of projects, can go on for, can have a major effect on a resident's home. And it's, as we discussed, it's really, really disruptive. This is where a really good quality customer care process delivered by a really good team of resident or customer liaison officers, CLOs or RLOs is the acronym, is really, really important. It's in the interests of the resident, the landlord, and the contractor, as it is with repairs, to actually get in and do large-scale capital works, because these are the big investments that drive the quality of the home, reduce further failure rates through repairs to the resident, and so we should really all invest heavily in the engagement and pre-work stages to try and get that resident journey working, so we can get in and do the work. I would say, I might be a bit one-eyed being a former employee of Fortum, but they were particularly strong in this space and used to still get very, very high access rates and really, really high satisfaction scores, well beyond 90% from residents across the programmes of work that they deliver. I should probably name drop Rebecca Goodwin and Abby Wilkins, who were the regional customer care managers, although, to be fair, Rebecca's just been promoted to the national customer care manager. And they developed an approach that and a team of CLOs that could make it all happen. So they'd really built a very, very strong proposition in that. So a really good customer care process could look a bit like this. I mean, obviously, I've seen it across a number of organisations and Fortum included, so I'll keep it generic. But generally, you would expect a significant pre-start phase, because that's really vital to warm up the resident to the fact that this is going to happen, so they're prepared and understand what's going to happen. So you'd probably want an additional introduction, a letter maybe, and going to meet the contractor face to face, maybe an event on a scheme or a development that allows you to go and have a conversation. Anywhere up to 3 months out, 10 weeks out, something like that, home surveys to assess the property condition and identify the issues and ensure that whatever the plan's going to be is going to be effective. And then maybe a month and a half out, you might have a meet the contractor event and probably involve landlord teams so they can be seen as a common face of the work being done. An introduction book will be issued with a guide to the work, so everybody can have a point of reference. And then maybe anywhere up to a month in advance, a letter goes out before the work starts. Then maybe 2 weeks out, there might be a home visit and an introduction. There might be another letter. There might be a phone call just before. And really, there's no surprise. This is all about increasing the chances of being able to access the property and making sure that any concerns that the resident may have is alleviated the best that they can. The focus is on communication and engagement and maximising the chance of completing the work. That is the absolute critical phase for me. During the work, additional support for maybe the elderly or vulnerable residents. As we've discussed, the profile of social housing residents, you're going to see, I think, a third of residents are over 65 now, and I think 60% are vulnerable or have some kind of disability or mental health challenges. So when you're looking at those kind of numbers, it's really significant that additional support is there, helping them maybe pack up and move possessions, or maybe setting up alternative welfare facilities. T points is a key one. Things like that. Daily contact by the support teams are key. Could be a visit or a phone call, or it could even be a coffee morning periodically to get a bit of feedback on how things are going. And then post work, you're starting to see things like customer satisfaction surveys, aftercare material about how the changes have been made, maybe in a retrofit scenario, what that equipment does, how it should work, and aftercare follow-up calls at maybe 3 and 6 months. Again, it's fair to say that Fortum are really strong at that. I know a lot of contractors do a lot of aftercare, but this is really about embedding it in. And it's, if you're going to be doing a relatively connected set of properties over an extended period of time, you need to have a reputation as a contractor that you are delivering effective work that is as least disruptive as it can be, but delivers the output, so people are seeing an effect on their on the energy efficiency of the properties. You want residents that have been through it saying to residents that are about to go through it that actually this is really good, it's not disruptive, and I totally support and buy into what this organisation's doing. For me, this is just about consistent engagement with the contractor and landlord, with each other, and then jointly attending events and creating a joined up face of the project. I think that's really, really important. I think if a landlord allows the contractor just to own that, or the contractor just relies on the landlord to own that, you're kind of heading for a bit of a failure. So it's really critical that joint face of the work being done is there, even to a point where you may get a landlord attending operational meetings to iron out issues and discuss things. It's really, really important. And we keep going onto this partnership and collaboration working, but it is now for a significant thing to happen.
Once work's been completed, it's really important that work's been completed to a high standard. And one of our recommendations in Repair and Trust is to have a comprehensive quality assurance process to make sure that completed works are evaluated, so that those repairs and that work meets established standards. What quality assurance systems have you seen work well? Good question. Focusing on repairs then, obviously. So a good approach might look like the following, really. So a bit like in the previous question, the pre-work stage is again really key. So you would expect planners would screen jobs that require maybe potentially additional triage to increase the chances of turning up and delivering the job right first time. They might need to contact a resident and use
something like remote assist video to do additional diagnostics. Again, for those listening that don't know what that is, it's the ability to have a video call with a resident for a planner or somebody to see what the job might be that maybe wasn't described well by a resident that maybe doesn't have the technical knowledge that sits behind it. For more complex jobs, supervisors should conduct a pre-inspection of the job. Again, to increase the chances of being able to turn up with the right jobs, with the right material and the right equipment to do the job first time. Each job should have a lockdown spec so that the scope and the materials needed are understood. Again, all about turning up and being able to do the job first time. And undertake a resident needs check and confirm any vulnerabilities, access preferences, safeguarding concerns, so that they can all be built into the planning of the job. When you're on site, it's absolutely critical, again, either for a direct labour team or a contractor, to thoroughly document the job and take photographs on arrival. Again, this is becoming a big prerequisite of AWOB's law. A visual inspection of all the materials prior to use should be conducted, so we can make sure it's fit for purpose and it's not damaged in any way. If an operative needs support or technical advice, then supervisors should be readily available to come and support. Regular photographs taken to document work in progress, so we could ensure that the work's been done to the right quality. Supervisors should conduct regular unannounced work in progress inspections to check quality. Critical bit is unannounced. Once the job is completed, thoroughly document the work along with photos and resident feedback opportunity to raise concerns during the visit. Once the work's completed, you would generally want to see a completion checklist signed off by the operative and, if possible, a resident. I know that can put a degree of discomfort. Operatives generally tend to be, sort of burly blokes sometimes. What you wouldn't want to see is a resident feeling that they are obliged or feel a bit intimidated to sign that. So I think there's a little bit of sensitivity around that particular phase. Resident satisfaction surveys undertaken using a short feedback form. I've seen that done in person, but I've also seen it done in retrospect after the job's been completed to give people a bit more comfort of giving genuine feedback. Follow-up inspections for complex or high-risk repairs, so damp and mould or structural work, I think is really important. If the job's not up to standard, a recall job should be raised, auditably raised, so we can track the follow-up work and the work completed to standard. I would generally want to see a supervisor involved more heavily with that to ensure that it's done second time completely right. That's it. In terms of issue resolution and learning, log and analyse complaints on an appropriate system to see trends in maybe consistently poor workmanship or damage. If you've got certain profiles of types of jobs that are causing problems, then obviously deep dive and understand why that is. That leads on to the root cause analysis to identify patterns of failure and do you need to retrain or improve supervision or process changes in some kind of corrective action plan that would just address that, stop it happening again. In terms of performance reporting, monthly QA dashboards and metrics shared between landlord and contractor. They're generally, again, talked about in operational and strategic core groups to get a broader joint position. Contractor review meeting, so again, discuss trends and challenges and improvement actions. I think it's this constant focus on performance and understanding why something's happened, not just what's happened, I think is really, really important. And I'm a big fan of landlord resident scrutiny panels, which obviously involve residents reviewing quality and standards and allow feedback. And one of the things that I know Fortum have launched is a resident panel. So they're starting to get proper, genuine feedback from a panel of residents from across their contracts, and I think that's a really important thing to do. It gives genuine, independent, advice and guidance to try and improve the service of a contractor. Because otherwise, you tend to focus as a contractor just on efficiency and productivity rather than recognising there's a resident at the end of this and it's their home. And then in terms of continuous improvement, this is about, continually refreshing training, regular updates, technical standards, soft skills training, all of that sort of stuff. QA processes should reflect landlords' expectations and regulatory standards. So if you're a contractor, you should make sure that whatever standards you're trying to impart actually match or exceed the standards of your landlord. And innovation trials, piloting new tools. So, on some contracts I've seen AI diagnostics and moisture sensors and stuff like that. So it is good to trial those things, because if they start to have a material impact, it gives you the ability to roll and improve services across, a wider set of contracts or services.
Have you ever dealt with a complaint about quality of workmanship or damage to belongings, for example? And you worked for a repairs contractor for Fortem, and when you worked there, was compensation something that Fortem offered? And if so, how did you go about working out what was due?
Good question. I'll give you a perspective of, I've not been in Fortem for sort of 4 or 5 months, but I can tell you what was happening up to the point I left. So I'll give you that perspective. And it's a bit like I explained with no access. A contractor would generally have to follow the process defined in their contract with each individual landlord, whatever their policy might be. However, it seems to be pretty consistent across most landlords, and this is sort of generally how it works, right? So firstly, you acknowledge the complaint promptly and make sure it's responded to within their, agreed service timeframes. That has varied in the past, but actually it's been locked down a little bit more with particularly with TSMs and the responding to stage 1 and stage 2 complaints. Make sure the communication has the right tone and is empathetic and respectful, and investigate thoroughly. So review job records before and after, photographs and notes from the operative. Hence the previous question, I talked a lot about photograph before, photograph during, and photographs afterwards. It may include follow-up inspections with a resident if you think it's relevant, so we try and get their perspective and see it through their lens. Speak to the operative to gather their account of the job, and supervisors if they've been involved. If belongings have been damaged, evidence needs to be obtained from the resident, so it could be photos, it could be descriptions, and consider if it was avoidable. So it could be that there is no way to repair that thing without this thing getting damaged. If it's not clear, then a contractor would need to work with the landlord to determine liability fairly. So the landlord needs to arbitrate in this particular case. If a complaint is upheld, work to provide a fair resolution, and that could be, for example, offer to repair or redo the work, provide compensation and replace damaged items, or issue a formal apology. It really depends on obviously circumstances in a given situation. If a complaint isn't upheld, it's also key to explain findings clearly and respectfully. Explain the escalation points. So it could be landlord complaints or housing ombudsman. An often forgotten step is the learning and improvement. So log all complaints on a complaint system and analyse the trends. Use it to improve training, supervision and quality assurance, so this continual learning cycle, and discuss recurring issues at core groups and meetings with landlords. So if it becomes a consistent trend, it could be some actions that the landlord could do to try and reduce the chances of those circumstances occurring again. And in terms of compensation itself, a lot of contracts actually formally require a contractor to pay if it were their fault, but the amount is based on the compensation policy of the given landlord that you're working with. And what that means is it's consistent and fair for all residents, not just the contract that particular contractor is working on. However, most would also make discretionary payments if it was felt the right thing to do. So it's not guaranteed, but if there was a particular incident and a contractor like Fortem might feel that they probably didn't act appropriately, then they might choose to make a discretionary payment too. That I've seen that a number of times.
This one is a bit of a hypothetical question. In your experience, what would be the ideal relationship between a landlord and a contractor in its supply chain?
Well, I've sat on both sides, landlord and contractor, and most relationships generally start and remain, or start positive and tend towards a bit of a transactional or tactical relationship, to be honest. That's just the way it tends to go. So using repairs as an example, landlords usually take the call. They normally diagnose the repair and issue a work order to the contractor. The contractor normally takes the diagnostic and work order on face value and schedules the work. The work is then done, but it's not necessarily first time and completed in the system. Then an argument might occur about the low first time fix rates, what should be done in the PPP. For those that don't know, that's the price per property. It's like a fixed price arrangement for doing repairs, and whose version of the WIP and performance is right, and so on. And that I've seen that occurred on a number of contracts from both the perspective of being in a landlord and on the contractor side. And the only party that suffers in this, as I've discussed before, is the resident. Really, it becomes about the landlord and it becomes about the contractor. And basically, performance ends up being built around measuring operational activity, not service outcomes. Service outcomes are, you deliver it first time, you deliver satisfying service to residents, and so on. So what kind of solution would you want to see then to get this kind of ideal relationship? Well, really, it's about shared vision, values, risks, and rewards. And what I mean by that is resident well-being should be at the core. Both parties should prioritise safe, warm, and well-maintained homes. There should be a commitment to social value. Contractors should align with the landlord's broader goals like community investment, sustainability, and employment opportunities for residents. If a contractor's just focused on doing their bit, meeting the KPIs and making money, and the landlord's just focused on a repair service, working and minimising complaints, we're not looking at the bigger picture here. So there should be a bit of a common values and vision about what we're trying to achieve. Clear roles and responsibilities are key. So there should be defined service standards, response times, quality expectations, communication protocols should all be agreed and regularly reviewed. So it should be very clear about how this is going to work. And there should be accountability mechanisms that support it. So KPIs, SLAs, performance dashboards should all be visible, shared, and jointly owned and jointly dealt with. Open communication, so regular joint meetings, could be strategic core groups. There's probably operational meetings to discuss performance, resident feedback, challenges. So there's a collective endeavour to try and fix all that sort of stuff, and real-time issue resolution. So, and I know this will probably resonate with some of the feedback I know you've given in some of your judgments, but a shared platform or system for logging and tracking repairs can reduce delays and miscommunication. If it starts to be fractured, which you get across contractors or multiple contractors with big landlords, that actually starts to make life a little bit more complicated. Resident engagement, so feedback loops where contractors should be involved in listening to residents and responding to the concerns. So rather than using the landlord as a shield and feedback goes to landlord, the contractor should have some direct conversations, in my view, with residents. And that's where the resident panels or scrutiny panels are always really good. Operatives should be trained to work respectfully in people's homes with sensitivity to vulnerable tenants. Again, we've talked about how that kind of training and that kind of communication approach is really key. Flexibility and innovation. So contractors should be able to respond to changing needs. So if you get surges in demand, new regulations, or emergency rates start to go up, it can't just be, well, no, I'm afraid that's not what we're set up to do. That's just the nature of the beast, particularly in repairs. We've all seen repairs go up. We've seen spikes and seasonal issues, damp and mold emergence. You have to be adaptable in how you deal with that sort of stuff. And it's really key to start to really drive in the use of technology and data. So smart scheduling's coming to the fore. Dynamic resource scheduling allows an algorithm to automatically schedule the right operative with the right skills, with the right location to go and do the job. Not a person doing that, because they tend to not be as accurate. Diagnostics, so we've talked about remote dial assist. We've also talked about scripting and AI to start to surface consistent repairs or to use it for the diagnostic approach itself, and reporting tools that allow you to be efficient and transparent. So all of these things allow you to really start to improve how the service works. And all this leads to really joint reviews and regular learning between contractor and landlord reviews of what's working well, what's not working well, with a culture of learning, not blame. And I think that last bit's really, really important. This is about collective responsibility, not individual blame. And I think that can be the route that some relationships tend to go down, but there really needs to be recognition it's about the resident, and that's it really. And training and development, for me, both landlord staff and contractor teams should be upskilled to evolving standards. And I see no reason why, if a landlord is delivering training internally on a new standard or a new way of working, or something's changed in the regulatory environment, why wouldn't you also consider your primary contractor in that? They are in essence part of your delivery organisation, so I don't see why that wouldn't occur. And in summary, the ideal relationship should really be about collaboration and transparency and ultimately resident focus. And it should see both parties succeeding financially in that. And what I mean by that is, I see a load of relationships that tend to work on a win-lose rather than a win-win. And what I mean by that is, if a landlord is screwing a contractor because of the contract and the contractor's not making enough money, the landlord feels the winning, the contractor feels the losing. It drives contractor behaviours to try and find another way to recover money and. Or if a contractor is felt as being, successful and profitable, a landlord doesn't feel that something's going on. Why are they profiting when my organisation's having to pay all this money? In reality, if you structure it properly, structure the relationship properly, both parties should feel successful. Both parties should feel the winning. And so both parties are then driven to work together. And if you get that right, it's great. If you don't get it right, it's going to fail. And there's a really big point here about the commercial model underpinning relationships should actually enable it. I've seen so many partnerships in word start, but the commercial relationships fractures it and starts to drive a gap between the landlord and the contractor. So that underpinning commercial relationships really, really, really key. And I think we are seeing glimmers of this, thinking sort of taking hold in the sector. So you can see some large partnership contracts being put into place now, particularly capital works type contracts, very, very long term. It's about building a very long-term positive relationship built on transparency and open book and, that kind of stuff. And actually that's, that gives me a little bit of hope. But it's definitely behind where the sectors are. So, even 10 or 15 years ago when I worked in utilities, that kind of embedded alliance or partnership working was really common in the sort of 2010s, whereas it just seems to be getting into this sector now. So there's definitely a bit of a lag.
So this is my final question for you now. We released our Spotlight report on repairing trusts back in May 2025. What do you hope that report will achieve?
How do I answer that question? Right. So, repair services, as we all know, have been under pressure for a long time, years. In fact, with declining stock condition, increasing repairs volumes, we've talked about the latest sector accounts and costs, really stepping up in recent years. Consumer standards and TSMs are very, very heavily weighted towards repairs and showed that we've been letting residents down, not giving them a voice. As I said, the sector accounts lay out a pretty stark financial position. There's not really the money to invest. And it's largely driven by repairs and maintenance costs. So the sector probably has to do some fundamental things. One is get control of its stock, work out how to invest in the long term to drive up stock condition and meet the standards that residents would expect in the homes. Point one. Point two is to rebuild trust with residents and start to deliver services that a resident should expect and, frankly, absolutely should expect. And we would expect in any of our homes if that was us. I think the Spotlight report lays out a vision for the second point, really, about rebuilding trust with residents, and I hope that the sector embraces it and genuinely takes it on board and responds. What I would hope to see, for example, is a cultural change where residents are treated a lot more fairly and respectfully, and it is recognised that their homes matter. Repair services should become more proactive with data and technology, and communication becomes more empathetic and transparent. Complaint volume should drop, due to focus moving to addressing root causes of complaints rather than just handling complaints, handling volumes and responding in certain timeframes. And residents, should become more empowered and have more voice so they can feedback issues and hold landlords to account so that they are addressed. And I definitely think that's starting to happen. And the big final one for me is fundamentally to improve the relationships between landlords, contractors and residents. So we can start to think of the three parties working in a genuine partnership, because I think that's where the heavy lifting is done in the sector, and all of this will be made to happen. I just hope that occurs, really. It'll be interesting to see how landlords take on this, and whether there's active planning gone into dealing with what you found in this particular insight report. I do hope that landlords are taking a really structured approach to reversing out what are the fundamental findings and rolling that out and working with their contractors to try and make that happen.
So that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for your time today, Daniel. It's been a really interesting conversation, and thank you to those who've listened to the podcast. You can find out more about repairs and maintenance on our key topics section of our website, and more podcasts on there too. That's www.housing-ombudsman.org.uk. And if you're a member landlord of the Housing Ombudsman Scheme, you can also get exclusive access to our Centre for Learning Landlord Hub, details of which you can also find on our website. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.